Welcome to Wine Country at Work. I'm Ralph DeAmicis. One of the most interesting groups of people we've met from working in wine country have been the tour guides who, like ourselves, drive around the region with clients. So here's a conversation with a good friend of mine who's a tour guide, but also, like many of the tour guides here, has a whole other life. What's the history of this building?
Well, we're trying to find the history, but it definitely dates back to 1890, maybe later than that. But the funny thing is we've gone down and done all the research and tried to find the owners to then maybe try to find who put the building actually on the property. And this property is very odd because it's like every 4 years it has a new owner. The property itself was much larger, of course, but you're 1862 and then you're 1866 and then you're going, can this just go for a span? And it's just so many people, and we haven't found any of the names that connect to the building yet. When we do the research, there hasn't been a definition of which one might have been the builder of the building.
Well, from the time when the gold rush started, the property values in Napa doubled, I think, every 6 months for 4 years. So that would explain maybe why properties changed hands so much.
We were wondering why it makes it very hard to research when you can't get if we could see a long span, we'd say, that's probably somebody owning a business there. It makes no sense to us if it's every 4 years and they've put this building here, then you're not looking at somebody doing a living, it's just somebody flipping the properties. But
and then
anyway.
Also, you're right along the Carneros Highway, which was the main route.
Yes. So this highway here was the state highway, most likely because they built the bridge over here that crossed the river, the Carneros Creek, which is I'm sure it was crossable a lot of the time of the year, except for in the winter back then even. That was put in around 1885. The road went to it. The road had to go to that bridge to get across it. So that's why it developed this pathway.
And then you're on the intersection of the Carneros Highway and Old Sonoma Road.
Right, which is known as the road to Sonoma. That's why it was even in 1864 was known as the road to Sonoma.
Right.
And can you imagine back then it was even called Old Sonoma Road. So
right.
It must have been really old for them to be calling it old then.
Well, maybe it was Old Sonoma because Sonoma was the old town, so to speak. It was the first town in
Maybe
this region.
Yeah, I just thought how funny if they're calling it Old Sonoma in 1860s, or 1880s.
Because it was established in the 1820s, and it was established by the Spanish, where the people who were building the roads later, they were the sea captains who came in later on in the 1860s. So that was the road to Old Sonoma, Old Santa Fe.
They called this one Lower Sonoma Road. And it was on the way to the ferry, so that's how you got down to the ferry from Sonoma, was to go down that direction to the ferry to then go into San Francisco. But
because during the time of the gold rush, starting 1849, the only way to get to the gold rush country by land was through Napa, so it meant going right over that road.
Oh, I didn't realize, you'd ferry up to Vallejo still.
Yeah.
And then they did have a ferry transport. I don't know how far it came this direction.
Yeah, everyone went through Napa.
And then stagecoach.
Yeah, that's why the properties went up in value so much. In fact, when they rescued the Donner Party, that was mounted from Napa.
Oh.
Yeah, that was
people. I didn't realize
that was people from Napa who went to rescue them.
Oh.
General Vallejo paid for it.
So when I bought this property, it was derelict 30 years. It had been opened, vandalized. There was very little history left. And I tried to save any of the history I could, which there were the front old windows. I was able to save those and the ceiling, and some of the flooring that you can kind of see, but otherwise it was pretty stripped. It was during the time, the worst part was during the time of the downturn. So in 2007, 2009, it's open, And now it has things of value. It has electrical, you know, just steal it for the copper and the piping. So I think probably prior to that, people just kind of let it be. But when they found that they could recycle and get money, they started really taking things apart. So.
Well, I've been, as a tour guide, I've been to one end to the other of Carneros from top to bottom. And as far as I can tell, this is the oldest building in Carneros, in Los Carneros. And Los Carneros, the land grant goes back to 1820.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wish I could continue back, but I've been able to not go any farther than 1864. It's when I started this project, the county was not interested in me bringing it back to life. They wanted to see it bulldozed down. So I was quite surprised by that, but it looked bad. But its heart was there. It was just graffitied and shot with bullets, and you know. But it was still made of redwood. And it was still standing, and it was still. I think it came out very well. It took 5 years to get everything turned around on this property, but yeah.
And the fact that you were able to reuse a lot of the materials is admirable by itself. But beyond that, just the absolute bravery it took to take on this project.
Well, it didn't have any of the rot. See, that was right. With the old redwood, you didn't deal with the rot. You know, which there's no building that would have survived that 30 years being in the modern materials. It just wouldn't have survived. It would have rotted away. It would have been eaten up because it was getting water on it and everything. The most damage done to this building was the trees that grew under the building. They actually were lifting the building up. And that's surprising to know a tree has that kind of power. So the walnut trees, there were 2 of them that were doing most of the damage here.
And then you told me that the foundation here is made out of what?
Stone. It's stone.
Like rocks?
Rocks. Just rocks.
Just
stacked rocks that are, yeah, they're actually mortared together, but they're rocks all the way around. Yes, this is soil here is like clay. You can make a pot almost with it. So everything is kind of packed in with, you know, on top of it. It just doesn't go anywhere. It's not silt. There's no silt here. Its life was originally a grocery store, a general store, and then it moved into a gas station for a brief period of time. It was leased as a gas station. So that, I think we're all talking about a 5-6 year window, and then it goes into its state of derelict again, and it gets picked up as a bar in the 60s. The bar part of it was fine, but when it got into the point of life where the government wanted all of these gas stations cleaned up, they required the owners, when it changed hand after the bar, you've got to clean the property up. And we have a fund to do that with, which was you spend $10,000, something of that, and we'll reimburse you up to $1 million to get it cleaned up. And so it wasn't an option either. It wasn't a, well, I don't think I'm going to do that. It was, you're going to get it cleaned up, and we're going to help you do it. So the owners in the 80s took on that undertaking, and they did what they had to do to pull the tanks and get the property cleaned up. And because the well was only X feet deep, they weren't sure the casing around the well was safe because of the toxicity of the gas tanks and all. They required them to destroy the well completely to get the well, the only well that was on the property at the time, which there were old wells prior to that, way back. Nobody even knows where they were, but they were over history, I'm sure, little, not very deep wells, but the particular one they had at the time in the 80s, they said worked well, but they made them actually do the full demolish of it to protect the water table because they didn't know the casing around it was safe. Then we came along, there was no water here at all. That was a big risk. But we're from the city, we're from Southern California, so we had no idea. I mean, we moved here, prior to that, we moved here in the early 2000s, but we had nothing to know about a well. This is the first experience, so just dig a hole and the water comes out of it. There's no, I mean, I don't know that we would have bought it today if we realized that that's not how easy it is. You may not get water. I just thought, yeah, you dig a hole and you'll get water, just put it here. So they had said the water was at a 50 feet maybe level, but they won't allow 50 anymore because it requires at least a 50-foot casing now to protect the waterway. So we had to go, they thought, well, we'll probably go 300 feet, 330. But out here in Carneros, it's not so easy. So, but that still didn't bother us because we were naive. And we went 3, 350, 4, 450, 5. And I didn't think about it. I was too busy working. My mother was a wreck. My mother was realizing, what if you don't get water? But a little after 600 feet, we hit a good water source out here. And we have one, people say, you have water and it's rare out here, but we have a very nice well here. So it worked out.
Well,
but it never occurred to me it wouldn't work out. It just did. That had to start that's what started our road to now we can get somewhere. So.
Well, the story that Barry told me was that normally if you get to 500 feet and you don't hit, you stop.
Right.
But you two were both touring. You run a tour company like we do, and you were so busy touring, the guy couldn't get you on the phone. So he just kept drilling.
He just kept drilling.
And finally, a little over 600 feet, he finally hit a great well. And of course, your next door neighbors, the Carneros Inn is famous for having to truck water in.
Exactly.
Because there's so few wells on their property.
Yeah. So it pays to be naive sometimes. Yes. And very busy in life. Yes. Yes. But we just didn't know any better.
Right.
And when you think about, if you don't know anything about well drilling, you're paying per foot. So thank goodness he didn't call and ask us, because we would have said, at what point does this end?
Right.
You're the well guy. You should know. Don't ask us.
Right.
So I'm glad that we weren't part of it, because we probably would have said, we got to pull the plug. It's too expensive. But another thing, if you're not used to well drilling, is you pay whether you get water or not. It'd be a whole lot easier if you drill, and if you don't get it, you don't pay for it. But no, you're paying for drilling. You're not paying to get water.
You're paying for the hole.
Right. The other thing that's very silly about the whole thing is not knowing what we're doing. Well, where do we put the well? Oh, well, how do we know to put the well? Well, the well driller says we have a well witcher.
Yeah.
And so we were like, okay, well, then I guess we'll pay to witch. Because they don't come automatically with the well driller. You have to make that decision. But we thought, well, hedge our bets, get a witcher out here. Man that's lived here in his family all his life comes out here. He picks 2 spots. We say, well, that's a good spot. Let's try there first. That could have destroyed us if we had decided to put the well in the middle of the property, not knowing why not, just put it here. When you have a 100-foot setback for your septic on your well, and you put that in the middle of your property, you end up destroying his. But we were lucky and naive. We put it off to the side, and so it turns out we actually accidentally put it in the best place that you probably could for the property. So that was just lucky. Just lucky.
And you had a witcher.
Yes, but he wasn't looking at the zone. He wasn't looking at the codes when he did it.
No.
Which is the smarter way to go, is you should go look at the codes and then say, based on the codes, where would you want to put this? And then see if that works. That's the better way to go than to just let the
universe decide.
Let the universe decide. So.
Now, when you decided to start, because you renovated the house and you renovated
all 3 buildings.
All 3 buildings.
All 3 buildings.
And did you do them coincidentally?
We started with this one.
Oh.
Yeah.
I didn't realize.
Yes, because this was an idea for me to do an investment. So the investment was to get the front building up and running first so we could find a tenant for it, and then work our way to the top building. And it was never our intention to live here. So when the building was left for 30 years, it was a mess. It looked terrible. So I had needed to do a project here for my gallery. I needed somewhere to show my art, because the regulations here in the county are so strict. You can't sell art in wineries. You can't, and you can't afford as an artist the towns. You can sell art in the town environment, but they're only a couple miles around, and the tasting rooms are taking up all the because an art gallery is in the same category as a tasting room. Everybody's fighting for that same space, and they're able to pay so much more because they're not based on how much they can provide on sales at that, because they have a bigger structure behind that supports it.
Right.
So there's just not a way for a lone artist to end up in a gallery in any of the town environments financially. So I was looking for where can I put a gallery legally, and I went down to the county and they said, well, you have to be in this zone, which is the CL zone, a commercial zone, and you have to buy the zoning map and figure that out on your own. We don't have a list. So I bought the zoning map, which is big, and Barry and I, my husband, we decided to go to each one to see what's at each zoned commercial zone. Well, it turns out that there were only 22 in the touristy area of the Napa County, so that wasn't so hard, but there are these long buildings there, Chandon and Auberge and Visa Tui. They're not going to go anywhere. This was one of the few left. And I thought, well, we've got to buy this because I would like to have my future where I could have something. I'm going to have to put a lot of work into it. It was overwhelming, the amount of work. But there weren't a lot of options. So I had called Barry and say, I think what we wanted was the old hall down the street. We thought we could do a little live-work where you live in it and have a little private gallery in the old Carneros Hall. And it's been derelict for years and vacant for years. And so that was my intention. But, and it had gone on the market. But it's almost too small and it has so many issues. I'm not sure you can get the septic in there and the county, So anyway, as Barry's leaving the hall, he comes by this building and it has the for sale sign on it. And I asked him, will you pick up the number off of that for sale sign? So he calls me and says, no, this is horrible. This is the worst wreck. I am not going to have anything to do with this. And I'm saying, he goes, I'm going to come home. I'm going to get you. We're going to come down here and I'm going to show you. Well, I'm the contractor in the family and he's not. I saw it and said, well, it looks terrible, but the bone structure is still there. It can be rehabbed. And he looked at me and said, well, I hope you and your next husband enjoy this because I want nothing to do with this project at all. So he was kicking and screaming. And it took me 5 years. I did most of the work, a lot of the work myself. I'm the electrician, I'm the plumber, and he was losing patience after 5 years. But we ended up living down here, finishing the top one and living here. And he's very proud of it. He's very happy here. He's now, it's going to be harder for me to get him off this property now than it was for me to get him on it. So, it took me a long time to take things apart. I took that building apart. So one day I'm up, and if I have him, he takes the sledge to it, right? It's just, and it's got nails and everything in it, and then you just have to take that whole thing away. But mine's all clean and taken out, and the nails are here and there. So I was on the roof, taking off the roof of the middle building, the roof tiles. And he gets a call, he's out on a tour, and he gets a call from the Carneros and concierge, and they're like, you gotta get your wife off the roof. It's like 9 degrees up there, and she's up there taking the tiles off, and he says, you tell her, I can't tell her. I don't even try anymore, so. It just had to be done. So this was overwhelming. And the way I looked at it was like this. Today I have to do this, and then I can do it. Today I have to do this. You know?
Like, just like an artist works on every single piece.
Because, oh yeah, because when you start with a blank white piece of paper, you're saying this is overwhelming. I'll never get through this. And you're painting, and you have painted an inch that day, out of this hole. But you don't look at it there. You just say, well, look how good that little inch looks. It's just right where I want it to be. And so this was, and Barry's not that. He's not an artist. So it made him ill thinking about all the work that it was going to take to do it, Even my family was not supportive of how much work it's going to take to do this, but a little at a time, and eventually it gets done. And then you look back and you can't even remember how you got there.
Well, it's like a piece of art. Sometimes you look at a piece of art and you think, how did I do that?
Yes, exactly.
How?
And then it's funny because the older you get, the more you look back and go, why was I so hard on myself? Because what?
That's much better than I thought.
Yeah, exactly. Look at yeah. Yeah.
Well, speaking of the nails, you found square nails all over this property.
Right. When I was taking it down, the buildings, I tried to put everything back that I could. When I took a board down, the old redwood, I tried to put it back. And that's when we were pulling the square nails out of the boards. And we did a really good job to recycle here. Because not because I'm one to, I mean, I like the idea of recycling, but that wasn't the intention. The intention was, this is quality material.
Mm.
It's very hard to use quality material though, because I buy a new 2x4 and it's an inch and 5/8
Yes.
or less now.
Not really 2x4.
Yeah. And I've got these old 2x4s and they're not 2, they're 2 1/4.
Yeah.
So you are really having a problem when you're trying to remodel and your boards are that far off from each other. But it was still worth the effort to use the original material that would last on and on and on. So I did.
Well, for instance, the walls of the gallery here are done
Yes.
with the old flooring.
Right.
And you were telling me before that you think that they had recycled these boards.
Yes. So it was interesting. I hand cut each board up because they were all tongue and groove, and you'd rip them if you tried to just pull, and you couldn't pull the nails because they were pretty much cleared when they lay in and then sand them down. So I got under and I was cutting each one and then keeping the tongues. So the material, it had years of different kinds of materials on some spots, but basically all of the flooring had been worn out from just being exposed, and just hosed it all off is all I did. And yet you've got a little bit of green here, you've got some red paint, that wouldn't have been the floor. They never would have just done that speckled green over here and red here. So I assume that, and I could be wrong, but my assumption is they had brought recycled lumber or the tongue and groove here. It's a very simple building. It was not money of the day. It was a working class person that had this built for a need. It's nothing fancy.
Well, it was along the side of the road, and it was designed for a mild climate.
Yeah.
How,
it just sheltered whatever was in it.
yeah, it didn't have
Minimal.
to be. You didn't
Right.
have to build it out of stone. You weren't building a winery.
Yeah, right. Right.
We're so used to our winery buildings around here built out of stone because they have to stand up to the acid of the wine. But this was built along the side of the road during the time of America's great expansion, when everything was built out of wood.
I don't assume that this building ever thought it would be a long term. I mean, when you build a building, like some of the buildings I've read were built here because they continue to burn. I mean, Calistoga, how many times did Calistoga burn down and rebuild? And they started realizing, like Ragusa building, it was built, originally it was a wooden structure, but it didn't even last a year, and they think somebody set it afire. So the owner said, I'm going to build it out of stone so this doesn't happen again. That idea of building a building so it would last, this was not in anybody's mind. This was just how quickly can we get into business, let's throw something up, and the wooden structure just happens to have lived probably through neglect, through nobody really wanting to be down here in Carneros for so long.
Well, it's like, why does downtown Sonoma have so many old buildings in it? It's because Sonoma was a bit of a backwater because there was no river. They couldn't afford to replace the buildings.
Exactly.
But the story I heard about why there were so many stone wineries in part was that when they were building the original wood wineries, they would use a lot of Chinese labor, which was very cheap. Well, there was a community of Swedes up in St. Helena who were craftsmen and resented the Chinese. So when you built out of wood, they would sneak in and burn your building down.
Oh.
That's the story I heard. I don't know if it's true.
Well, I do know that the wooden structure I'm talking about, the Ragusa building, was built by the Chinese, and they don't know who set it afire. That's interesting.
Yeah, and then so they started bringing in the Italian masons who were primarily in Sonoma. So a lot of these old Italian families that are here came in here originally as masons to build the buildings, because it was mostly a lot of the Italian masons were the ones who did that kind of hard work, and the Swedes didn't mind the Italians so much.
I wondered about that. I wondered if the Chinese actually built Ragusa. I didn't get that in the history when I was reading about that story. They didn't say, then they brought in other laborers to put the building together. I didn't think it would be the Chinese.
Yeah, the Chinese
Yeah.
weren't masons. They didn't have the tradition. The Italians, all they build with stone because that's all they
Yeah,
have.
yeah.
So now we get to the point where the building is nearing completion, right? And now you're going to rent it out commercially.
Right, right.
And then we've got that story from there into how it becomes
A gallery.
a gallery.
Yeah. Well, the county is very challenging to work with. So that was, I thought the worst part of taking on this project was going to be the bureaucracy of actually getting things done. And I was wrong. The getting of it done, getting the codes and doing all of that was hard. Especially, I have to say, if you're a woman, it makes it harder. You're not taken as serious as a man. So it's, the county, I remember one of my first county meetings was, Kerry, do you realize this isn't going to be like reading Architectural Digest? When I told them what I was going to be doing, they just were not believing this, that it was going to be something I was going to do. But I give them credit because later when I finished, they apologized, saying we didn't think you could do it. So
We underestimated
yes,
you.
you underestimated,
Your
and they
resolve.
underestimated not the woman in me, but the artist in me.
Yes.
So, but then when we go to lease it, the codes to lease are just horrific for a small business. It takes almost a year. It's now, back then it got to be almost, for me to get a use permit just to do a gallery was 17 months. I waited through paperwork, and now they're saying they've got that down to a year, or 8 months to a year, but it takes traffic study, water study, it could be a sound study. It's these studies and these things that you have to do to get approval to be in a business on a property that commercially is saying you could do it. So this building can be a bar, it can be a restaurant, it can be, but you still have to go through this process of blessing what you want to do in it. And that takes a lot of money and time.
And there's no guarantee that they're going to approve it at the end.
Exactly. No guarantee that you will get that at the end of the day, that you will get exactly what you want. So it's hard for a small business to lease a building and then put out all that money and wait the time it takes to do it, and only to see if it all works out. And I try to tell people, it's just the process. It's as long as everything fits in the box, as long as you are doing something that can be done here, and as long as your water is, and as long as this traffic is not too, you get the, but that's still a risk. You know, that's still in their minds a gamble. So I've had over 100 inquiries, but nobody was willing to go forward. So I said, well, I'll go forward and show that this building can be, you know, viable, and I moved the gallery in here. So.